So I've had a couple of questions about this type of problem, solving by substitution using fractions. So right here we have the problem. We have two equations. 2/3 x plus 1/2 y is equal to 6, and 1/2 x minus 3/4 y is equal to 0. Now the hard part about these, especially with dealing with fractions, is that you really want to get rid of your fractions. But on this particular case, it might not be the smartest move to get rid of your fractions. The reason being is that we want to isolate one of the variables. So what I'm seeing the most is that you will want to isolate the y value. Okay, it's personal preference. You can isolate the x value if you like, but I've seen more people use isolating the y value, so we're going to go ahead with that. Now, the trick is, when you're doing substitution, the trick is picking your favorite equation. Once you pick your favorite equation, then you solve for the letter that you want. In other words, let's say if we pick the first one to be our favorite equation. So we're going to take our first equation that we have right here, and we're going to solve it for y. Okay? Now, in order for us to do this, we can do this in one of two ways. We can either multiply both sides by our least common denominator, or we can just simply move the x value over and take care of that 1/2 y. Well, whichever's easiest for you, that's all that matters. But right now, I'm going to go with that second method. I'm going to take, let me get another marker real quick. I'm going to take this equation, my first equation, and I'm going to solve it for y, meaning I'm going to subtract the 2/3 x on both sides. So that means, when I come down here, I will have a 1/2 y is equal to a negative 2/3 x plus 6. Okay, all I did was subtract 2/3 x on both sides of my equation. Now, to get y by itself, I have a 1 divided by 2 y. In order to get rid of that 1 divided by 2, I have to multiply both sides of my equation by the reciprocal of 1 over 2, which is 2 over 1. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply every part of my equation by 2 over 1. Okay? So when I go ahead with that, that means that this 2 and this 2, this 1 and this 1 cancel out, and I'm left with a y. Now, equals. I'm going to write it out a little bit better here, so I can have it all broken up. 6 over 1 times 2 over 1. That way I can see what's going to cancel out. So when that happens, well, nothing cancels out with this 2 and this 3 and this 2 and this 1. So that means we're going to have to multiply straight across. So now I would have y equals a negative 4 over 3 x plus, nothing cancels out diagonally here or vertically. So now I just have to multiply straight across. So 6 times 2, well, that would be 12. 1 times 1 would be 1. So 12 over 1, well, that gets me a positive 12. All right, so we have the first equation up here, solve for y. Now for the second equation, I'm just going to bring my second equation down here. So that means I would have 1/2 x minus 3/4 y equals 0. Okay, so now we're going to be dealing with these two equations. Previously, we took our first equation, we chose that to be our favorite equation, and we solved it for y. Now we have to take what we got for our y value and plug it in to the other equation for y. In other words, we're going to take what we just found right here, and we're going to stick it into that y value right down there. How that would look, this would be 1/2 x minus 3/4 times a negative 4/3 x plus 12 equals 0. There we go. So we took our equation that we just found, we just solved for, and we plugged it in for that little y value right there. So now to see what happens, let me get my correct marker. 1/2 x. Now we have a negative times a negative, which would mean a positive. Now 3/4 times a 4/3, well, look at here real quick. This 3 can cancel out with this 3 down here. They divide out. And this 4 cancels out with this 4 down here. They divide out. So all we have left with is now just a positive 1x. Okay. Now the weird thing is too, that 3/4 did apply to that 4/3, but it also has to apply to this 12 down here. It's got to distribute. So what we have, this 4 can go into this 12 how many times? 3 times. So now we have a 3 times 3. Well, that gets you a -9 equals 0. All right. So now we have a 1/2 x plus x minus 9 is equal to 0. So to combine like terms, 1/2 x plus x, well, that gets you a 1.5 x, or when you convert that from a mixed fraction to an improper fraction, 3/2 x minus 9 is equal to 0. So let me get another sheet of paper real quick. Three halves x minus 9 is equal to 0. So now we're going to solve for x. So here we're going to add 9 to both sides. So we would have a 3 over 2x is equal to 9. Now to get rid of this 3/2 here, we have to multiply both sides of our equation by the reciprocal, meaning we're going to multiply both sides by a 2 over 3. Okay, so when that happens, well, this 2 cancels out with this one, this 3 cancels out with this one, and all we have left is a 1 times x, or just x. Over here, this is an understood 9 over 1. So this 9 and this 3, they can be reduced by 3. In other words, this 3 goes away, and this 9 gets reduced to a 3. So now we have a 3 times 2, well, that gets you a 6, and a 1 times an understood 1, well, that gets you a 1. Guess what? We have now x equals 6. There's one of our answers right there. So now we have to go out and find the other answer. Well, how we do that, we take one of our original equations, okay, either one, and then we plug in x equals 6 into either one of them to figure out what the y value is. So let's say I'm going to plug it into this equation right down here. I'm going to plug it into the second equation. It doesn't matter which one you plug it into. So what we have now when I plug this 6 into our second original equation, 1/2 times 6 minus 3/4 y is equal to 0. So when I do my multiplication, 1/2 times 6, or half of 6, well, that gets me a 3, minus 3/4 y is equal to 0. So now to isolate the y value, I have to subtract 3 on both sides. So that would be a minus 3/4 y is equal to a negative 3. Now to get rid of that negative 3/4, I have to multiply both sides of my equation by the reciprocal. In other words, multiply both sides by a negative 4/3. All right. So negative times negative, well, that becomes a positive. This 4 divides out with this one. This 3 divides out with this one. And all I'm left with is a positive y. Now over on the right-hand side, remember this is an understood negative 3 over 1. So now this 3 cancels out with this 3. A negative times a negative, that becomes a positive. Then all we have left with is a 1 times 4, which gets me a positive 4 over an understood 1, or just positive 4. So in this problem, in this system of equation, our final answer would be an x value of 6 and a y value of 4. So x is 6 and y is 4. Okay? The hard part about this equation, this type of problem, is getting rid of your fractions. Okay? Remember, solving by substitution, you take whichever equation you want and you solve for whichever variable you want. It can be either one of these two equations. It can be either variable you want. So in other words, there's four ways to get the same answer. Okay? Now remember, watch out for your rules of multiplication. Watch out for your fraction rules too, because they do come in handy. So as always, let me know if you guys have any more questions. I'm happy to help. This can be a little tricky, so definitely reach out to me if you have any questions.